Hello, good day, everyone out there. Thank you so much for tuning in. This is Dissolving the Divide, and since the dawning of time, it seems that there's been divides of whatever factors that play into our evolutionary lives, and throughout the time in history, we've evolved different methodologies, sciences of how to treat healthcare and all this stuff, and it seems that in most recent times, since the dawning of the Rona, as I like to playfully call it, COVID-19, DVOC AI, whatever you want to label it as, there's been tremendous, ginormous, polarized divides all across the map, probably any country, So today we're not going to be focused on the whole COVID scenario, but we have Stephanie MoDavis here to bring some profound insights and solutions and just overall observations about her direct experiences and what she's directly involved with her practice, and among so many other things that she's researched in. So with me as always is Leslie Powers, broadcasting live in Reading. Maybe I'll be up there sometime soon. And how do you do?
Hello. Thanks, Derek. Welcome, Stephanie. So glad to have you here. It's been my honor recently to meet you, to participate with you in a podcast already, and really glad you're here with us today. So I'm going to let you share a little bit more, but I know that you've been through quite a journey within the healthcare system that's really inspired you to do something about the discrepancies and dysfunctions within it, with an attempt to really integrate, the healthcare system with actual healing. So I see you as an activist and an analyst and activist here to create a new strategic renovation of our healthcare and our ability to receive proper healing. So welcome. Tell us a little bit briefly about your journey and what inspires you to do this work.
Well, thank you, both of you, for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here. And as I continue on this project, I am directly in the moment, evolving and learning and trying to apply some of these theory hypotheses that I have. And I'm very much still en route with my organizations. I just want to make that very clear, because who and where in history, unless we were talking about really the Egyptian civilization or ancient civilizations, have combined these aspects of full potential healthcare with full potential healing. And it's something that many of my friends and people within the communities have told me is just a lost cause. They just told me, give up. You're never going to be able to combine these aspects of science and spirit, as we like to call it, that there's these vast polarizations. And as we've evolved and become more fragmented, or noticed our own fragmentations within ourselves and within the system, it seems as though we continue to polarize broader and broader and broader. And we start to literally poke fun at the other aspect, whether it's the, spiritual individuals completely having lost trust in healthcare, or just certain individuals just completely having lost the common sense within healthcare, to healthcare providers who I'm also very connected with, feeling very confused and, within their ego around things that go on outside of the system, as so far as, the healing community. And a lot of people that we're connected with who are taking their own agency back, and they're doing things that aren't necessarily peer-reviewed and have all the scientific data behind it, but we just very tangibly, viscerally know that this stuff is working. So from my experience, I actually started studying Eastern philosophy and yoga and Chinese medicine, pretty much the Eastern way, when I was 18 years old, when I was introduced to a dance company who it was their requirement to do 6 days a week of Ashtanga yoga. And naively, I thought, oh, this is going to be easy. I'm young. I'm a runner. I was all athletic. And then when I got into the actual practice, I mean, it completely transformed my way of thinking about Eastern practices, the body, the mind, body, spirit connection. And physically, it took me to a different level because I was not prepared for that sort of an intense yoga stretching practice. I was completely naive, thinking that because I was in good shape that I could handle that. It changed me. It took a long time, but at some point I really started to understand what Western healing and healthcare was completely missing. And then about, I'd say 2-3 years into that, I had a direct experience with my own illness. And I'm very careful nowadays to not identify with that. I've seen way too many people identify with their illness as an identity, in particular mental unwellness at this point, and then glorify it. And then we capitalize off of people's, I believe, shadow sides. And so I'm very careful that to share that my intense illness was an experience that I needed to go through. I was fortunate enough to have the proper help and the self-knowledge to come through it to a degree where I can look back on it as an educational experience. So jokingly, I often say I have a PhD in the Human Rehabilitation Project of when you're really completely broken down. I mean, guys, I was in a wheelchair for a year. I could not walk. I had kidney failure. I had multiple organ transplants. I was on dialysis for 5 years. I did not look, feel, produce anything like I look today. And it's very hard for people not to judge a book by its cover. I want people to understand that this is a real complete transformation and regeneration project. Not saying that I didn't have the genetics I did when I was younger, but I went through a 10-year experience where I had nothing physically, emotionally, mentally. I was completely broke down like the butterfly and had to build myself up. And what I discovered was healthcare had very important aspects and focal points that I needed along my journey to stay alive. Okay, it's just how it was for me. I needed multiple surgeries. I needed 2 organ transplants. I needed the hemodialysis and peritoneal dialysis process for myself. There were big requirements that were necessary for me. And I used to think back when I was a yoga teacher, this is important to impart here, that somehow I had failed in my natural healing process because I got sick. And I was actually embarrassed that I was a meditation expert, a mindfulness expert, yoga teacher expert, and I got sick. I somehow thought that I had failed. And I had to deal with my own emotional baggage around that. And the more research I had done, what made my ego feel better about that was that learning that many saints and many mystics and many people who have come through an exceptional stage of process and transformation physically had to have their own direct experience. It was just the only way to couple the knowledge with the experience. They're 2 sides of the same coin. So at some point I embraced, this is happening to me for a reason. Instead of me becoming a victim to my circumstance, and yes, it sucks, and yes, some days I don't want to get out of bed and I teeter on wanting to give up, I had to let myself feel it in order to heal it profoundly.
Yeah.
So, but I also was able to apply the witness because I had the Eastern philosophy perspective. So amongst my journey, I had the direct, I'm in it, but then also I would get the glimpses of the observer. And I would be able to say to myself, okay, Stephanie, just stay on track. This is happening for a reason. Just trust in the process, really just be in it and trust what's going to happen through this. So that was profound for me. And
Stephanie, that's amazing.
And at some point I realized.
Go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead, Leslie.
Well, I want you to finish.
No, you go.
Yeah, they brought up so many points. And, I wanted you to clarify a little bit more on that comment you made, what is missing in the Western healthcare system that you learn through this this journey of yours, it brought a lot of insights as to what was helpful and what was missing.
Yeah. Thank you, Leslie. I do have a tendency to go off on tangents, so I'm very grateful that you're here. So my point being, and why I sit here today, is because I'm trying to, like you guys, dissolve the divide. Okay, and I'm here to say that healthcare is needed, but they need a significant mirror so they can see themselves and they can start to level up in what the actual public needs are at this point. And this is the issue. So my philosophy and standpoint with my work is healing and healthcare are both 100% needed. They're actually equals, and they're actually opposites of the same side of evolution within the human being. So my experience where I sit today has come from having that experience of where healthcare, the Western model was really, really lacking. And I've developed an overview of what I think is actually going on, rather than just having the reductionist point of view of healthcare sucks, healthcare is evil, doctors are stupid. Like, I want us as a whole to move beyond that reductionist view and to actually start to take action to understand, if you have interest and value within understanding the medical system, is to understand what's actually going on. And then we can apply that nuance to see if there's a way to try to rebalance, because there are many good things about the model that need to remain, right? Mm-hmm. The problem is that the Western medical model has become too detailed, focused in their knowledge, and they're becoming insulary in the ways that they're thinking. So extreme left-brained as far as evolution and technology. And we still have not integrated what I would say would be the up-leveled feminine aspect of healing. Mm-hmm. So what was missing? First, what I discovered was missing was, I'm going to be broad here, was a complete lack of cohesion and congruency, and a model where me as a patient could go in and focus on my healing rather than the bureaucracy of how everything was disorganized and discombobulated. Mm-hmm. That was the first thing I noticed, was that I'm here to heal, and nothing about this model is providing me the coherence in order to heal. So I felt like I had a full-time job just managing my own health care and my ways around the system, right? So I had to deal with costs. I had to deal with referrals. I had to deal with insurance. I had to deal with the lack of communication between my providers and insurance companies, and referrals and Medicare and things that I was having to deal with as a CKD patient. That was the first thing that was radically disappointing, to say the least, about the healthcare model. Was I'm here to heal, and I'm literally caught in this tangled web of a complete incoherent mess.
Yes. There are a lot of compartmentalizations too, with the specialties kind of cutting off parts of our body, without real integration.
That was the next layer, I'd say, Leslie, was besides the structural model of the incoherence, was now I'm having also the incoherence of me as a whole being. Yes. Right? So now I have, I was told actually in my case not to have a PCP because I was too complex, that I only needed to have specialists. So then I have, at one point I literally was seeing almost every specialist, right? So I had, a nephrologist, a pulmonologist, a cardiologist. I had an infectious disease doctor. And again, their direct focal specialties, there was nobody connecting the dots for me. There was nobody advocating for me as the whole being and how these things coherently made sense from a patient point of view.
Right. So there's like this very scattered process that also could be very frightening of someone coming into the healthcare system with a diagnosis that's scary.
Oh, yeah.
And then having to manage, like you said, all of the logistical things about costs and insurance and referrals and making appointments and making getting tests and lab work and all of these things that you're sort of out there juggling, often, dealing with machines on the phone or difficulties with scheduling and difficulties with record transfer, all of that, right? On top of then being in a system that is very divided within itself based on specialties, right? And oftentimes there's not one individual who has the bird's eye view that's helping a patient to connect all the dots and lead them through a coherent sort of flow of care, I guess. That's what
Are you talking about holistic care as opposed to kind of sick care? Yeah, just real quick. I mean, to go back to the foundational issues of these things. And yeah, Stephanie, this was all happening in America, I want to say, right?
Yes.
And, when I was in France, they have a totally different medical system and it's pretty much free in a sense. But yeah, I was paying like health insurance was 35 euros a month. That's all it was. And everything I paid to doctors and hospitals was kind of reimbursed. But yeah, all that aside, it's, and I was, I talked to thousands and thousands of people, through my jobs over there. And a lot of them, they wanted to know where I'm from with the accent and, like, oh, it's better, this and that. And, like I've really tried to get in like certain, harsh truths and stuff. And like, they're pretty much in agreement with me, as far as, what's the difference of over there and over here? Well, like the medical system, number one, it seems like they operate on a patient cured is a customer lost type of mentality in a sense. And it's really taking it back to the first cosmic law principle, which unfortunately they don't really implement these hermetic principles into the healthcare. But like the whole mental state of how they're, going about the healthcare system and, all that stuff.
Yeah, Derek, I'd like to
insurance and all that. Yeah, Stephanie, you're good.
I'd like to say, in addition to what you're saying, is because all of us here and this community have had the opportunity to gain knowledge through the, like the work of Mark, and, we understand the trivium, we understand some of these things and these nuances, is that discussing first principles and discussing, hermetics and we are so far away from that. There are 1,000 things that need to be addressed before we can even have this conversation. There's also, I've discovered through my work within the system, is that first I want to say not all providers are evil. A lot of them have immensely good intentions to go in and to be of service. It's just because the way they are trained, the way they are brought up, the fact that there is zero self-development, self-work, mirror work, true integration work within themselves, they fall into almost a mind control aspect of, and then it becomes something like, I don't know what I don't know. And they just keep getting funneled into more specialty, and the broadness, the abstraction of the whole picture, they have lost so much vision. We have to go way back and really just start talking about, encouraging models of education that also offer self-awareness and keep the providers in direct contact with their patients and the general public throughout their educational experience. Because I will tell you this, one of the projects I did recently was myself as a representative of a patient, and 3 other patients were invited through Awakening Healthcare into Texas A&M Medical Engineering Department, their med school. And we sat there as, 3 patients really sharing about where our experiences, the medical model has missed the mark for us long-term experienced patients. And it's like we were speaking to, emotionally immature children. Like, the knowledge is there, but the actual empathy and emotional literacy and long-term repercussions of having these complex issues and dealing with the system, They had no clue where I was coming from or how to even access that within
That's
me.
frightening. That's very frightening. And what do you think the cost is of this trend of the medical system or the medical care being separate from the spirit and the mental and emotional health of patients?
I mean, the cost is evident in what we see in the world. It's awful. We are more obese, more mentally ill, more sick, more autoimmune, more, I mean, it's so very evident. But again, because of this disparity in the way that we're trained, the medical system keeps trying to find solutions and keeps missing the 1,000 ways we could have upstreamed, mitigated, and started to cultivate change within the system. So, and what has been happening, ironically and beautifully in an interesting way, is that more providers are getting sick and more providers are having to have their own direct experience. And I know many providers who openly say, I don't trust any doctors. I don't know where to go. I don't want to I'm not taking that medicine that they told me to take. So literally they start to contradict and it creates a massive cognitive dissonance within their own psyche and how the system is fragmented when they start getting sick. And my hope within this process of more providers getting sick and feeling disenfranchised and leaving is that they have an awakening of their own. And what I think has happened is that people on the other end of the spectrum, the spiritual demographics, have already had their awakening. And we're learning how to integrate and ground our awakening. So we have the knowledge, whereas a lot of people in the left brain community have the knowledge, but have not yet had their awakening to understand the holistic principle of it. So we're coming from this from two different aspects. And I believe that there are people such as, people in this community and other people who have kind of hit this more middle ground where we're like, hey, we kind of see enough of both sides that we're seeing that we need to actually cultivate better education and resources and talk about this way in which we can work together. But then, we get into issues around our ego and communication and, can you come off of your pedestal and talk normal to the patient if you're a provider? Like all of the ego shit is getting in the way of having these more conscious conversations.
Yeah, you
They're
mentioned
the experts, right? Sorry,
right. The expert meant that's kind of a whole nother aspect of how our cultures we're trained to think about we have to go to the experts, right? So the experts that people are going to in the healthcare field have a certain training, and you reference how they are trained. And I wondered if you could expand on that a little bit of how the training is kind of creating this funneling and the separation.
Real quick, just to add on and kind of reframe, because I forgot to mention this in the whole evolution of where we came from in the introduction. But yes, we have to really put a a big asterisk on in the early 1900s when the whole Rockefeller folk really infiltrated the healthcare system and made the homeopathic community out to be the quacks, right?
Yeah.
Because they had the and that's like the rise of big pharma and all that stuff. So that's when you have allopathic versus homeopathic really butting heads, and allopathic took it over from there. But yeah, as far as like all that training from then and there, and like the textbooks and how they were written and what they left out and what they cherry picked and all this stuff, and yeah, things are more compartmentalized, more polarized, it seems, and more specialized, I guess, in a sense. So yeah, Stephanie.
Yeah, I don't want to leave that out, guys. I mean, there's a obvious to us. There's an obvious perniciousness that stems back, that's intertwined and threads through all of this. Like there is, but that being aware of that evil that has existed doesn't really help us today. So we have to find kind of these strategic ways to help to encourage people to self-discover. I think within the medical system, what needs to come before this sort of knowledge about what has happened in the past is them being open enough to look at themselves and their own cognitive dissonance, to open their soul and mind up to, oh my gosh, could the entire way that I have been trained and lived my life and this purity of my intention been so muddled down this path. And I mean, it's shocking.
Yeah.
It's a shock to the system when somebody realizes that everything that they've been for may have these very dark systemic roots in some of these things that you talk about, Derek.
Sure. Yeah, there's it comes from that ignorance, that sort of tunnel vision, the compartmentalization, the occultism, in our world, that people go into the systems that they trust to learn, to become experts with the intention of helping and doing good work, and don't know that history and don't understand how what they're learning is been very, very cherry picked and is leaving out great aspects of the healing, of great healing modalities: Chinese medicine, homeopathy, Ayurvedics, chiropractic, naturopathic, functional medicine. There's a lot of aspects, yoga, that are left out, and they just don't have, they're not allowed, even through the licensing and the rules of the system, really not allowed to talk about certain things or refer, certain procedures.
Right. Yeah, and how we work here right now in our Western civilization is on a model of capitalism, unfortunately, and what happens is within this world we do create this scientism mentality where then you are actually glorified and you get to go up the ladder of success if you do what they tell you to do. So it's a manipulation. It really is. It's a manipulation of the mind, and it becomes very confusing when you could be getting rewards and prizes and for your work in science, but meanwhile it's to be funneled into one particular way that benefits most people except the patient. Okay, so again, it's you don't know what you don't know, and to be able to see yourself requires something to really break you to be able to go within. And Leslie, like you were saying, I'm not expecting and I'm not advocating for every doctor to become a healer. What I'm really advocating for is the ability for them to open their mind enough to realize that they provide something into the healthcare community. They provide an aspect that's important to healthcare, but it is an aspect. And that if they truly care about patients and themselves, they would at least create bridges to healing. That's all I'm asking is I don't need you to become the expert. And I see that some physicians get so disenfranchised, they leave the medical system, they start to educate themselves, and then they want to become the healer. And if that's their journey, that's great. But I'm saying I don't need every medical doctor to become a healer in that sense. But what I do need them to do is open their mind and connect with other people who actually will be able to take their patient more into a complete state of well-being. That's what I'm advocating.
Partnership, more openness, awareness, and then more partnership. So how do you describe?
Wait, Leslie, can I just say something before you ask that question? Because talking with Dan Arnold recently, we had him on, and he suffered some cocktails of horrible pharmaceuticals, in his demission of his position. But anyways, what I wanted to mention is that what I mentioned, there's a lot of TV programming, and him being a former police officer, I kind of mentioned that last time, and all these TV programs, they cater towards certain genres, and the medical one, that's a huge one. And I noticed they really try to glorify, glamorize, and put these people on a pedestal, and actually create these almost soap opera miniseries in these shows, and they do try to give the idea of all the viewers. That's why it's called television programming. They're programming people to believe that they're these saints, and they really super care, and there's going to be a dozen people around you to help you out every step of the way type of thing. And that's not to say there aren't people that actually carry that true care and passion for that work. And I've been very fortunate to have people take care of me, and been very grateful for that. And seeing other things in real life and hearing stories and it's like, I can't do that kind of job. Like being in an operating room, open heart surgery type of stuff. It's like, I don't have like the capacity. Well, I could train for it, but yeah, folks that, my hat's off to folks that are that courageous for that kind of work. Like we do need people.
Yeah, and to emphasize what you were saying about this savior mentality and how it is very much glorified within our very three-dimensional reality. It's this worshiping of matter, of the 3D realm, and that the healthcare providers or the surgeon is the savior. And this is why one of the biggest tropes is like, the surgeon is the ego, the god, right? This god complex that starts to happen. And again, that's if you're stuck in a materialistic worldview, and again, that's glorified. So then we start to capitalize and promote these people as healers. I mean, look at what happened, guys, through COVID. I was living in New York at the time, and at 7:00 every night we would go out. People would go out with their pots and pans and start banging for all the healthcare workers. Yes, is there a nobility? Is there? Yes, it's complicated. It's complex. It must have been very, very difficult. But again, remember, that's what they sign up for as healthcare providers. That if there's a war, like a soldier, you're in it, so to speak. That's part of the job. That's part of the maturity and maturing within your career is to, you don't need to be rewarded every day after you work, so to speak. But yeah, that glorification and that pedestal completely removes all agency from the patient as discovering the own self-healer within. So you completely strip them of their sovereignty, of their agency, of cultivating a transcendent experience with their own health. And that creates this split and schism of, you're sick, I'm going to take care of you, I'm the expert. And in fact, it's frowned upon when you become an agent of your own change. Again, they might say this. This is one thing I really realized when I started to interact with more healthcare providers is this happens all the time, guys, is they'll say, oh, we do that. We do want our patients to have agency. Oh, we do that. I can't tell you how many times I've heard that. And I'm like, okay, but you're not seeing to the degree that it needs to happen. You're only seeing from a particular degree that you have vision and you've arrived at within your own consciousness. So the intention is we want our patients to have agency. We want our patients to be sovereign. But because they haven't discovered the true sovereign nature within themselves to that degree, they can only express that and mirror that onto someone else to the degree they've freed themselves, which we find within the medical system has no incentives to have a free, sovereign healthcare provider. And in fact, now they are funneled so strictly, and they're actually losing their rights with the little bit of freedom they had to cultivate this free agent relationship with their patient.
I wanted to comment on a couple of things. I think that we have to keep in mind the context of licensing and liabilities, because that's both are very strong in the medical system and derive or guide what healthcare providers do or don't do.
Right.
So, for example, I went to took a loved one to the doctor because of pain in the abdomen, and basically the provider kind of split into two parts: the professional advice and feedback about it, and then was very clear to say that there was a separation from her own personal experience, because she personally had a viewpoint and an experience with the same symptoms, but could not make recommendations from her license about what worked for her. Right. And so she shared almost like on the side, this is what I experienced and what helps me. And it was a very kind of holistic, kind of a treatment. But she was like, but from my doctor hat, I can't recommend that. This is how we see it over here. So it was very interesting to observe that. And I think that there's the part of the reason she had to separate that out, we were lucky. I felt lucky she even shared what she did, because the stuff on the side was what really helped, was my son. And but there's and I work as a licensed mental health provider, and there are certain things that you're expected to do or not do. And I'm a lot freer than, I would say, the medical providers, where they, like, for example, we saw during this whole pandemic thing that certain medicines they couldn't even prescribe, or they risk losing their license. Certain protocols become taboo or not research backed in that kind of scientism way. And so they're oftentimes, their hands are tied between their backs about what they can prescribe or not, for risk of losing their license or being sued. I think that plays into the expert role too. I mean, even like with the Board of Behavioral Sciences, where my license, originates, and I do clinical supervision, they now have me sign a form that says I'm 100% responsible for whatever an associate does that I'm supervising, right? I'm somehow magically responsible for anything they do, no matter what, right? And when you more and more have to sign papers, or you're told things that are impossible, you tend to, I could see how, say, a medical provider would get kind of uptight about people doing what they say and not doing what they don't say, or a doctor saying, never put anything in your ear, unless I prescribe it, things like that. There's that.
Yeah, Leslie, to add upon what you're saying, I want to go back to when you were saying about the abdomen and the advice that your physician gave you, these two different things. Is, again, I was really embedded into the healthcare system for 10 years at prestigious healthcare institutions all up and down the East Coast. And I got to the point where I became very privy about what I needed to do to take care of myself. And whenever I saw a doctor, I would hear their advice, and then I immediately would say, what would you tell your daughter to do? Because that's the only way I could get the actual truth of the matter. And most physicians would tell me then. Most would say, well, if it were my daughter, I would tell them to do this. So this level of cognitive dissonance has been going on, I think, in the aggregate of the healthcare provider population for a very long time. They just know that they have been facing the ways in which they've had to butt up and challenge the system and say, oh, this medicine isn't covered, but let me do this and I'm going to get it for you. So actually, I think this is a huge aspect, one aspect of this current narrative that's been going on with the healthcare burnout, is that I think COVID just amplified a gaping wound that was a pre-existing condition of doctors having to work too long, being glorified for grind mentality and working for 12 hours a day every day. It's like a glorified militaristic, like, press and push. So they've been working so much, but then they've also been facing the ways that they've had to challenge the system, and they've just kind of normalized it. That is the problem. This is where huge problems start to flourish, is when we've too long normalized dysfunctions. And we have those providers who say, well, this, but if you're my daughter, this, and I can't get this medication, but let me try this. And I've worked with a lot of those providers who've been fighting their own battle within the healthcare system. And now all of this has happened. And now I do believe that that's why we have so many physicians and providers really waking up and saying, wait, you know what? I played this game for too long. And now I'm seeing, I want to know what actually is behind this. And I'm not going to continue forward until I actually start to see. And once they start to see, right, what happens? You usually get pissed off first when you start to see more truth, and then you can have a revelation. But I think more and more providers are starting to dig and really do their own information, and they've just gotten sick and tired of the limitations that have been pressed upon them, and now they're faced, Leslie, like you said, with this big conflict. Is if I really stand up for my values, I'm going to lose my license. And now what do I do? Because now, I'm relying on my income. I've got a family. I've got bills. A lot of physicians I know don't pay off their medical school loans until they're in their 60s.
Wow.
So, I mean, again, it's, going back to how do we, what has been lacking from the medical system, and what do we have to do? I mean, it's cost, it's insurance for the patient, it's also for the provider as well, it's the bureaucracy. At some point in this game, we actually start to see that a lot of patients are up against the same challenges. The physicians have and providers have the same challenges that we do as patients. And then we realize, oh, it's actually not us that are so divided. It's actually the system of control that we're all under, and we all are fighting the same problems. So, the bureaucracy, the rules, the quality of care, what can I say, what can I say, the political factors that start to come into it. And then we have to go next tier, next level. When we start to realize these things as provider or patient, we have to start to ask ourselves, why is the system so complex? Why is everything so complexified? Why do we have resistance to change? What are the institutional barriers? What are the political barriers? What are the lack of resource barriers? So that work needs to be done within the self. You need to really say, like, why am I resistant to change? And facing the own ego death, and what a lot of people within the spiritual community have already gone through and integrated. This is where I feel a lot of healthcare providers and these people with the Western mentality, the matter-based science mentality, they're going to start to wake up to all of this. And I think what's going to happen is they're going to go on the same process that a lot of us had in the spiritual community of seeing all of these things and needing some sort of soft landing. That's what I hope to provide, this kind of soft landing to say, like, hi, you've arrived.
Yes.
Yeah, pretty scary, right? But don't necessarily quit and fall. Like, we actually need healthcare providers, guys.
Oh, yeah.
When you go through an awakening, you have physical manifestations that happen through awakenings as well. And we need providers. They just need these people to help guide the experience of when they start to wake up.
Yeah. I wanted to point out too, I think, this reconditioning, of outlook is also needed on the side of the patient, because many patients are going in wanting the quick fix. They're demanding, a pill, a solution. And I worked, for a decade with in a healthcare, a health clinic that really was making an effort to be integrative. And I would hear that from the medical providers, that they did have a holistic output. They're trying to recommend nutritional changes and exercise, and they would be very frustrated that a lot of their patients would get very frustrated and not want that, to hear that. They want the medicine and the pill. So it really is like
it's twofold.
All around.
Yeah, we address that within Awakening Healthcare. There's very much two sides to the one coin that we're trying to advocate for, and it is the empowerment of the patient as well. So it's really the awakening of the provider and the empowerment of the patient. And you're right, we've been trained and conditioned. There was a time in history where maybe we could trust physicians a little bit more and providers, and most of our parents have that do whatever the doctor says mentality. And but I do believe that how I saw this, and tell me if you feel I'm inaccurate here, but let's just say the boomer generation or the generation prior to them has had that kind of trust what the doctor says mentality. And then I think the Gen Xers had a little bit of questioning everything mentality. And I think the way that the global system is trying to keep younger patients enslaved to just listening to the doctor and losing the agency and staying addicted to just the easy solution-based approach, creating all the support groups for the people with the mental health, and these are the drugs we take, and glorifying these identities. I think that's how they're trying to lock in the younger generations to that, just giving over their sovereignty is by the glorification of the identity of, right? Yeah. And I think that there are people who are saying, like, actually, you can heal. There's a lot of things that you can heal from. And if you just follow these steps and do these processes of inner work and healing and take this other journey, you may find that you may not have this particular condition that you once did have. So, but it's complex because, again, the evil within, us, the society, the culture always is trying to re-enslave the new generations. And I think they're doing that by these identity politics.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally. Leslie, did you want to say something?
Well, I wanted to expand upon like what is real healing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
And
great.
how does it differ from what's happening, often in the healthcare system?
Yeah. So again, I think I was very clear at saying there are aspects of healthcare that are very important. Let's kind of shift over into the healing. And, healing, number one, is a lifelong process. Healing is a process. It's not a quick fix. It's not a solution. It's not a pill. It's something that needs to be done coherently with you as like the model, the make and model that you are. So everybody needs different styles and nuance of healing at different times. What you're going through might not be exactly what I'm going through or what Derek's going through. So there has to be a level of having more of a open level of awareness and consciousness in the healing field to understand that it's not a one size all model, because if that's what we're preaching as healers and spiritual people, we are locked in step with the same mentality of the healthcare providers. This is a one-stop shop, like one type way we heal, like this medication for all people, this thing for all people. So within the spiritual community, one of my missions has been to take something like the chakra system or a map. Particularly, I really like spiral dynamics. So I really like working towards an integral level of consciousness and awareness so that we can understand the levels of growth that are below or around or above us, and have respect for where people are along their level of evolution and consciousness. Because again, as spiritual people, if we say, oh, we're all stuck in 3D or in the third chakra of ego, and we're trying to move towards 4D, the heart-based level of awareness, well, you're still claiming that that's where everybody is. There may be people who already are more in an enlightened state, or there may be people be stuck in a survival state. And in fact, when you don't commit to the process of studying this, you will find that you really bounce around between these levels of chakra systems or consciousness because you have not yet quite integrated them to the level that we need to. I think that we can sometimes pull the cart before the horse and assume that because we open into a level of consciousness that we have integrated the entirety of the shadow within it. And that's usually not the case at all. So I find that I came through a mapping system of the chakras because I come from the spiritual perspective, right? So how that looks is you start with the survival, the root, the base, your basic needs, very matter-based. Once you start to integrate how the physical realm works, then you move to the emotional body, right? And then remember, you're always having to keep connected to what you've integrated in the prior system below that. You can't go into the emotional body and forget about the physical. Right? Mm-hmm. So you've got the physical, then you've got the emotional, then you've got the identity and the ego at the third chakra. Then you go up to the fourth, which is the heart and relationships. Then you go to the throat and speaking and communicating and listening. Then you go to the third eye, which is your not being disillusioned and being awakened to the broader sense of the world. And then traditionally you would stop at the seven traditionally, which is the state of the realization that we are all connected and we have this kind of unity consciousness. I went through this system and I went through the enlightenment phase, guys. Okay? So what I mean by that is I popped through the enlightenment, I ascended, as the spiritual world would say it, but then I didn't do it in a way where I integrated the shadow at every step. So when I blasted into the enlightenment phase of development, I was not here on this planet. I was so disconnected with the physical, right? And we see this in past gurus and certain individuals. I'm thinking of Ramana Maharshi, who attained levels of enlightenment, but he enjoyed those realms of consciousness to where or Gandhi, the physical body just completely deteriorated, stopped eating and taking care of the physical vessel. So for me, that's why I like the aspect of, the integral spiral dynamics, because they seem to have combined with each level of consciousness, the awareness, and then the imbalance and the ability to integrate the shadows simultaneously, like a simultaneity. Yeah. Because I went through the enlightenment, I spent a year completely out of body. and as Mark would call it, like this new age BS, like
Right brain
completely
imbalance.
spiritual. Right. So what I had to do was descend through the chakra system all the way back down. These processes of going up and coming down took me personally years to do that. So that's why I think how the chakra system is taught is excellent. But if you're not capable, the goal isn't to ascend. We're still in earthly form. We're still here in 3D. So you have to level up in your consciousness, but also integrate the shadows so you're able to hold just a much broader lens of reality and compassion for where everybody is along their state of development. And where I find that the freedom movement, the truth movement gets caught up is that we begin to judge people who get stuck in levels of consciousness, or if they're working through a level of consciousness that we have penetrated through, our bubble has burst through that level of consciousness, then we can get very judgmental on someone who is literally just a tier below us, and we forget where we've come from. So having the integral level of consciousness and really looking into spiral dynamics helps us to have more compassion for what levels and tiersness people are at, and you begin to not get so hijacked personally when you see somebody at another level of consciousness, because you understand that only hijacks your own ability to produce and be in this world. Is if you are getting so caught up worrying about someone at a different level of consciousness or growth is at or stuck at. Does that make sense?
Yeah, very complex, right? Aspects. So healing and health is a very complex, holistic thing, right? Or not a thing, but a energy. It's a combination of mind, body, spirit.
It's
Right?
like bioenergetics and yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, levels of consciousness matter, and the integration of all levels of our being, which could be, is represented in the chakras.
Right,
And those are things that typically are not talked about, not even acknowledged, or even, talked about as real, because they're, not verified within our system.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like the only one small sliver of our being is being addressed.
Yes. And one thing I want to just mention that's so important is that as I've evolved, again, we all have the tendency to be egoic when we bust through into a new level of consciousness, thinking that we've mastered it. And really, we've literally we have been given a taste of it. This is a problem within the healthcare field and the left brain thinkers and with the right brain thinkers. So it took me many years to truly understand aspects of true authentic healing. What I'd hate to see would be the medical field start to open up to levels of healing, and taking a very novice based spiritual practitioner who literally is just getting introduced to the chakra system for the last 6 months on TikTok and take them to help teach the providers. So there has to be some level of really understanding what it looks like within a being to have this higher order system of development. And I want to read a quote to you that I have here. I don't know who said it. I'll try to find it for you. But what this person says is, what I am proposing within the spiral dynamic integral level of consciousness mapping is that the psychology of the mature being is an unfolding. It's emergent, it's oscillating, it's a spiraling process marked by progressive subordination of older, lower order behavior systems to a newer, higher order system. And remember, it's very difficult sometimes for somebody to recognize someone in a higher order system if they are at a different level of consciousness. They always say you can't see too much further out of your own level of perception, maybe a little bit. But when you see somebody who's really transcended a lot, you either shut that off, maybe there's jealousy, or you think they're crazy, right? They always say, 1 step ahead and you're a genius, and 2 steps ahead and you're crazy.
Yeah.
So integrating the psychology, really new psychology, I could just say, into healthcare would be very beneficial. There's very little psychology within the medical education. forget nutrition, they don't talk about any of that. There's very little psychology. So when they see a patient, they have no idea what level of awareness or consciousness or perspective they're at within their physical body. And again, think about the medical system. Our focus is the physical. Healing, they think healing is the physical.
Yes.
Which, if you're going to look at a whole model, you're going to be like, okay, what about the emotional, the ego, the spiritual, the other, the eighth? Like, there's so many other realms of consciousness and
Yeah, how are they
awareness.
sleeping and all that stuff as well? Yeah,
There's
like the
so much
protocol.
more.
Yeah,
And it's all connected, but we do need these people who have these levels of multidimensional understanding and who really commit to this work to start to share the information. And what needs to happen is we need healthcare providers and patients to face their resistance to leveling up.
Yeah.
And the comfort that comes from not having to level up.
Yeah. Well, we all are beings that like comfort and tend to want to stay there, and really growth comes from leaving the comfort zone and being motivated and it being safe to do so as well. And I think that is it's safe within this healthcare system to level up. Is it safe for people to push the envelope? And I think we've seen really clearly it's not very safe.
One gentleman I really like and have learned a lot from about these very complex group dynamics and integral levels of thinking is Daniel Schmachtenberger. I've been pretty much obsessed with this guy for a long time. And he's brilliant and just has this capacity to see so many things on so many different levels. He appears to be very left brain because he's very smart. But to me, it makes sense what he's saying. And he often says that in the West, particularly, that we need some sort of like ritualized discomfort to break, to evolve. And I think that's why we see a movement towards psychedelics, because it's a way to really pull somebody out of their comfort zone.
Sure.
And just to give my 2 cents on psychedelics, I kind of lie in the middle. I'm not really for it and I'm not really against it. What the trappings that I've seen is that it can take somebody in a specific realm of awareness and perspective and really open them up vastly to a higher level of consciousness. Mm-hmm. But there's trappings within this if you're not hanging out with the right crowd or having this kind of level of discernment. You see too many people start to rely on plant medicine for ceremony. We see a lack of integrating the process. And I've actually worked with clients who are stuck in realms or dimensions and able to ground. So I have a person that I've been speaking to his parents quite a bit who's stuck in what's called a K-hole. So he was a young gentleman who had very severe depression and had tried all the medication, which made him worse, made him have bouts of psychosis. And eventually somebody along they went through the medical system, nothing helped, went through the mental health, nothing helped. And somebody, one of his doctors then recommended ketamine. And what happened was he was about 17 at the time. It took him up too far, too fast. And he's now, he literally can say, I'm stuck in a K-hole and I'm experiencing psychosis, but I don't know how to come back down. So there's a lot of trappings within plant medicine that we need to be very aware of. And we also need to, I think, Johns Hopkins, specific institutions are now all hopped up on psychedelics as this is going to cultivate the global awakening. And I'm not saying that it won't, but if you don't have these people who understand integration and the goal is to not need any of those plant medicines, it's just to evolve in our consciousness without our restrictions and limitations that we place among our own psyche and ourselves, we could end up in another problem where everybody's very out of body and very disconnected from the grounding. You have to reintegrate the proper left brain with those right brain kind of experiences as well.
It brings up to me a dilemma that we have. So one is about proper assessment, in a holistic assessment, which I think is always really important. And so a holistic assessment is going to be looking at mind, body, spirit, and many aspects of personhood, physicality, spirit, energetics, environment, social, economic, like this whole holistic view. And like you were saying, for this to be most effective, the guides, you know, I see, like, instead of having an expert model, more of a guidance model, come with a person who's able to help assess the holistic needs of the person, and then help partner with an individual to create a plan. So like you were bringing up this whole, the pitfalls, there's pitfalls with all, you know, probably any aspect of a prescribed modality, whether it's psychedelics or a pharmaceutical or a practice of any sort. If it's not seen on an individual basis, really looking and assessing a person very individually, then there's a risk of things going sideways, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then I think that there's a certain extremism that, like, people have developed. You were mentioning earlier on that some people in the spiritual holistic health model are totally rejecting the medical system, and people in the medical system are rejecting alternative medicines and complementary, you know, methods. And so there's this extremism going on. And even like in mental health, like we talk about the green language, and I see in the freedom, a lot of the truth talkers and freedom movement, they'll say, therapist, the rapist, never, stay away from them, you know? And I think that that's a pitfall as well, as being too rejecting, making quick judgments, creating this like apprehension.
Yeah, I think that, you know, there's so much you said, Leslie, and I want to talk about the assessment. But before I talk about the assessment, is this rejection model is, you know, when I came into this, I was very much of an outlier who worked with individuals from more of a multidimensional perspective. And that just evolved naturally through my having wellness centers and teaching yoga, is because of the way I was working with people. People would approach me then and say, can I talk to you after class? Do you can I have a session with you? Because I was opening these levels of their awareness that they weren't maybe used to addressing. They liked the meaningful, deep conversations. They liked the soulful interactions. They felt comfortable and safe with me to have a sort of confession without judgment. And, you know, there were so many levels of need that I started to see that was happening, but I didn't have a specific medical degree, right? But I knew that whatever I was called to do there in that moment was visibly helping, but I also realized my own self-responsibility in that position, and understanding that if I'm here placed with another individual as a source of sharing, caring, teaching, I need to be very, very careful. And, you know, I think that sometimes the education model can provide a false sense of security of I have the answers. Whereas because I didn't have that educational model, I knew I didn't have all the answers. I was exceptionally humble. I was exceptionally willing to shift my worldview and evolve and admit I was wrong. I mean, I was so grounded and humble in my teachings because I didn't have that piece of paper to rely on. And I think that this is an important thing, is that level of humility with the professionals needs to always be right next to that piece of paper or degree. And every moment I would say to myself, I realize that what I could be doing might turn out to be not the best result for my client at this time. And I have to be willing to accept that we're having an interaction, but I am by means no way the expert. And I started to realize that in order for me to do this with a state of humility, I had to keep pushing and kind of being that mirror, but instead of projecting what I felt they should do for them, I had to keep reverse engineering the process back onto them becoming more sovereign and empowered and live being the author of their own journey. And I think that's one of the trappings that we get into the professional world, and why people reject the therapist, the traditional therapist, is because we are still very much in this development of shedding that mentality of I'm the expert and you're not. And I think the therapists certain therapists are attempting to do what I just explained, is to say, wait, I have an expertise in book knowledge, but I don't have an expertise actually in you. And I'm here to share with you and care with you. But actually, this is about you discovering the system that works for you. Now, again, if somebody has severe mental health issues or yes, I understand that at sometimes that protocol is not going to work. But I think what humanity as an outlier in general has an issue with the way the current therapy model works is that it's ongoing. It never gets better. You're on medicine. You have to keep going back week after week after week, and you're relying on advice more so than firmly kind of integrating these more complex nuances. And somebody like you, Leslie, I would assume is already doing that. But in the world at large, again, it requires a level of self-work that most medical providers don't have time or aren't incentivized to do, to be able to hold this mature space with their patient.
Time and incentive. Time's a big one, especially in the medical average life of a physician or PA is they're booked really heavily and may have 5, 10, 15 minutes max per patient.
Right.
And so when is there time to do a holistic assessment? How do you get to know your patient?
What I suggested to some providers, and it kind of, I think, got lost in translation subtly, but was because of the lack of time that they have, was to use their patients as mirrors for their own self-development. And again, I think that this might go on kind of unconsciously, but I think that if the provider was a little more aware of the triggers that their patients were showing within them or their coworkers, I mean, there's such a radical lack of trust back in that medical model of not only providers with patients. A lot of providers don't trust their patients. They're like, oh, I tell them what to do and they don't do it. They really don't care. There's a radical lack of trust between patients and providers. There's a radical trust between providers amongst other providers. It's like, this is like grade school behavior.
Yeah, you're so right.
But if they're just providing them drugs and everything, that kind of stuff. And because, they get the kickbacks from the pharmaceuticals. We had James Cordner on. We kind of spoke about that. That's why I had like the blue pills in the background. Like the blue pill is symbolic, go back to the Matrix movie, even, the number 4, like it was sedating him pretty much,
Yeah.
It's not like this. Yeah. Okay.
I just want to say, I want to just subtly push back on that and kind of steelman that is, I believe that you're right, that there's yes, are we captured by big pharma? No doubt about it. No doubt about it. But what I'm saying is I think providers individually is what I've seen and I've heard is some providers say, I'm trying to give you what you want. I'm trying to make you feel better. I'm trying. So there's this lack of nuance of what's really going on there. Right. And then again, there's also those patients who are like, I want to feel better fast. And there's this muddiness between like, how much would a provider encourage a patient to suffer before they give them something to help? Now, if you look at somebody like the shaman, suffering is how you grow. Suffering, being in the pain and being in the darkness and being in the pit, that's how you evolve. That model, I could assume, would be terrifying for any modern healthcare professional because of the liability and the insurance. And like they literally can't let their patients suffer like that.
Yes,
because one sue and they're done.
Yeah.
So we have to change the incentives and kind of just Leslie, back to the assessment. Having a holistic assessment, I mean, I want to work on this with you guys, would be killer, but no doctor would have any idea what to do with that. Mm-hmm. So what we need to do for now, that's a great ideal. Maybe not in our lifetime, but what would be better is let's have a more holistic assessment and then at least have the providers to be open to say, oh, I'm seeing this patient has an exceptional amount of emotional dysregulation and I don't have time or wherewithal to handle that. They said the therapist, the cognitive CBT didn't work. Here, I'm connected with providers and people within my community who have this specialty. So if I can create the relationship between these individuals who work in alternative means of healthcare, then they're no longer necessarily liable if they say, I am not liable, but I'm connecting you with these people outside of the system. And if you find more help with that, that would be great, because I actually care about you.
Yeah. I think that many providers would be open to that type of integration and that collaboration.
Yeah.
And I really think you hit on an important issue about a lack of trust, that mutual lack of trust, and think I would love for you to expand on that a little bit more. And then just to look at our time frame, we have about 15 minutes, and I want to give you also an opportunity to talk about where you're going with your, the vision for the work you're doing.
Great.
And share more about that.
Yeah, it's totally, a part of the solutions. And yeah, when, regarding what Leslie asked you, yeah, try to see how we can, find solutions towards, some of these issues. Since we're running out of time, oh la la.
Yeah,
Sorry.
I think I can do this briefly.
Cheers,
So finally, it's
No
taken me a
pressure.
long time, because this is a huge issue, and I can't pretend that I have the solutions or the answers, but I just want to share, where I'm at. Leslie, just to kind of answer your question about the trust. I mean, listen, when we don't trust somebody, we have to look within ourselves to understand why we don't trust them. And then maybe to say, well, why am I continuing to be around this person or organization if I don't trust them? So there's a lot of layers of self that need to go into trust. And again, I think, unfortunately, a lot of systems operate like high schools, whereas it's normalized to gossip, to talk bad about people, to manipulate, to judge, to be totally unconscious emotionally, to have this emotional illiteracy. It's just, I mean, I couldn't even go into a system like that and work at this point. There's just no way, right? So again, we've normalized, an adolescent mentality in high-profile systems, which is crazy. So I think that, the trust comes back to the self. Is if we're not trusting each other, it's because you're not trusting yourself and either who you are or where you need to go or what you need to do to get there.
Yeah, that's such a good point, Stephanie, because ultimately that brings it back to know thyself, and the mentality that we are responsible ourselves for our own health and our own health care.
Absolutely.
And that ultimately it's not about looking to some external expert to tell us about ourselves or tell us what to do, but to gain information, glean knowledge, and then discover for ourselves our healthcare paths.
Yep. And, honestly, I pray for these healthcare providers to understand their role, because when we get them out of their ego and we get them into the place of, when you are free, when you work on your own inner freedom, there's no possible way in hell that you would want to enslave somebody with your sole opinion or expertise about something without including the radical self of the other. There's just no way you'd want to do that. And this is where we need to help encourage the medical education and their providers to be at, is this more integrated state of awareness where they honor and appreciate the awakening and evolution of somebody's health within their own understanding.
Gosh, we see ourselves through the reflection of others. So, we go to the primary care and the lens that they're seeing our issues. We can gain that information, but not see it as the end all be all. Get the, perspective of a chiropractor, which is different from the physical therapist, which is going to be different from the yoga expert, which is different from, the holistic dentist, And I think that when we can take on that responsibility to understand ourselves, and respect each perspective, but not put it on that expert as the one to give us the answer or to heal us.
We didn't even touch on the level of provider, and this happens with spiritual teacher or guide or whomever too, is the level of transference and counter transfer, things that can happen between provider and patient. Could you imagine that your PCP or the doctor that you spend time with is, yes, they have knowledge in the mind, but some of their suggestions to you are coming from their own projections?
For sure. Yeah.
Right. And this happens all the time, even though they're taught not to do this. Unless you've embodied the process, you're still doing it.
Yeah.
So it's very important. Like we're of course we are where we are because we need more awareness and integration. But just to kind of wrap up, guys, with what I'm doing, I started regeneratinghealthcare.org with a physician that then stemmed into what's called awakeninghealthcare.com. And the actual direct experience is I realized that I was not going to be heard by anybody within the system because I don't have a degree. Outliers are not welcome. So I had to find a healthcare provider who had my same values and wanted to try to up-level aspects of healing and healthcare to work with. So, and her and I have a lot of conflict at times together because we come from these two different polarities, but we care enough about the future of healthcare and patients and sovereignty to be able to try to make this work. So Awakening Healthcare is a nonprofit where it's, me and my partner, Dr. Shaw, are the ones who are the program directors of this, but we have a board, we're getting together and things are rolling for us. And what the general mission is that we want to provide programs and resources to up-level the awareness in medical system education and in hospital institutions and clinics at large. But because the rate of change is so slow and there's so much entropy that we have to break through, for us to implement one little shift or to get this patient program into the medical system took so long. But they're starting to wake up a little bit. So we're starting to get in the system. So, but again, once we go in, we hit all the barriers, the bureaucracy, the money, the insurance, the liability. So every time we go into something like that, we got to get through this distortion. But there's enough leadership within certain aspects of healthcare right now that realize, wow, we are radically broken, and we've been saying we're broken for many, many years, but I actually have to step up in my leadership and face some of these systemic barriers to do something about it. So we need to connect with the right leadership to even start little, my colleague says, tiny pathetic steps. Models, systems, tiny pathetic steps. It's going to take for a long time. So in the meantime, we have these two arms with Awakening Healthcare. One is really representative of Ruby as the physician, and one is really representative of me as the outlier, spiritual healer, as that other alternative holistic aspect of things. So Ruby spends most of her time, she teaches, she's a professor as well of medical education. So she's doing these tiny pathetic steps with talking to leadership, implementing little programs, shifting little things. We commune often to see where we're at with these realms. And then my aspect of things is right now I'm advocating and about to propose a brick and mortar space that would be almost like a trauma integration center, a self-development center for the patients and providers who are looking to get their unmet needs met in the meantime. So again, we might not have this merge, especially in my lifetime, of all of these theories and concepts. Are we going to have an integral state of consciousness within the healthcare institution in my lifetime? Probably not, right? But so what we can do at least is to create a relationship between this system and little ways in which we can change that, and then have a direct bridge and a relationship between these self-development centers that patients are getting these deeper needs and knowledge and understandings, getting the information there for them. And that's going to be patients and providers. It's really anybody who's waking up to this broader scale. And then the goal is to not keep these things separate. So the goal is the brick and mortar, the first one that I'd like to create. I'd like to have multiple, but the first one I'd like to create, it's essential to have an ongoing relationship between these centers and what goes on with the patients in these centers, with the hospital, institutions, clinics, and medical schools, so we can start to inform each other of true care and healing alongside of healthcare.
Mm-hmm. That's exciting. Wonderful. Yeah.
Thank you. I appreciate that. It's been very difficult as an outlier of the system to stay advocating for them and not just want to tear it down. It's been very hard.
Yeah, a lot of patience required for that little bite-sized steps, along the way. And I do think that that's true for all of our endeavors, here to dissolve these divides and bridge differences, to bring people together is in with a lot of patience and perseverance and very small steps towards a clear, a clear vision, clear principle.
Yeah. And there needs to be different layers of ground crew to do this. We still need, the warriors on the field standing up to evil and tyranny. We still need the voices. We still need people to challenge the status quo. And we need those important voices that, there are doctors now doing this, and we desperately need more. But I kind of envision awakening healthcare as this community-based, like, let's these unmet needs, that feminine perspective of care, as we're doing this, as we're trying to face this tyranny and this control and this evil, let's be boots on the ground with helping with the unmet needs and trying to educate at the same time. So we really need this leveled up masculine to be fighting for the health of the world and the system, as well as this leveled up female who says, I see the tyranny, but I'm not angry. I'm actually working on boots on the ground systems to help people evolve when they need help.
Yeah. And all the time, kind of working with this censorship that's happening, right? And trying, because I see this model that you're describing in the approach as a way that can maybe go under the radar of this censorship, which is happening, in response to like really more extreme kind of stances, then all of a sudden it's shut down, right? And this integrative model, I feel that you're talking about is something that's really embracing the people, that we want to work on helping it promote their growth, and change.
All right. Yeah, Leslie, we're going to do all we can to try to avoid the censorship, as you were saying, instead of pressing up against it so rigorously and pissing people off. I mean, obviously, I've been working on this for many years, and I want to try my best to be strategic and to be accurate and authentic. Again, so I think that there has to be the people who are boots on the ground fighting against the tyranny and the evil. But we still need to care for the people who are suffering, who aren't getting their needs met with health and healing, and who need help. So I'm hoping that we don't get censored. I don't know, the awakening healthcare might set off some alarms at some point. Again, from a lot of the medical model I see on Instagram is, they already think that they're woke. But, from the real process, we realize that we never really achieve the wokeness, that it's just a constant process of awakening. So, yeah, we're doing our best. And, I'd love to keep you guys posted as we go along. And, yeah, thank you so much for having me on. I really appreciate what you guys are doing. And, trying to dissolve the divide is a huge thing in any system and within our own lives. So thank you, guys.
Yes, thank you, Stephanie. It's been wonderful having you on our little show here.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Bring you back down the road.
Awesome. Thank you, guys.
Yeah, definitely. And this show is not sponsored by anyone you
Pfizer?
might have seen on television. Yeah, all those things. And, but certain side effects might include, expanding your horizons and being encouraged to know that there's tiny, pathetic steps that are groundbreaking in that profound way, but they're actually creating and bridging gaps and, creating new, a pathway towards, this better way of health and just addressing people's health and that whole journey of that process. We all understand that, even the whole awakening process, and like people want to throw out woke, that's a 4-letter word, and it seems like they're bypassing a lot of stuff. They just want to have some kind of ego attachment to any kind of title of these compartmentalized things, and you're an expert and this and that, and that's great. You went through umpteen years of school and money to get where you are, but there's so much ego attachment to that. And if you look at the solutions as well, there is a form of collective shadow work that needs to be addressed and done on so many different levels within the whole medical industry. And to kind of humble people as well, you need not look further than some statistics, black and white right there, of just like the top 5 leading causes of death. What's in there? You know, one of them, you know, the whole medical malpractice, all this stuff, overdosing, you know, bad prescriptions.
And the rest are really lifestyle. So
Lifestyle.
that's up to us, the patient.
Yeah. We
Yeah.
have a lot of more power than we realize.
Absolutely. You know what, guys? The world has changed. If we haven't noticed, it's gone exponential. Time is moving so quickly. It's changed. It's past where we are already. So we need to really kind of remember and humble ourselves and see where we need to improve, because it's not slowing down anytime soon.
Yeah.
So, you know, I'm trying to be courageous and be open to this ongoing change and confront my ego when it wants to stay stuck or in a specific philosophy or mindset. And that's, you know, if we could just get that message out, I think that'd be a great first step.
Yeah. Sounds good. Open mind.
Yeah.
Eagerness to grow and learn. All right. Well, thanks again, Stephanie. We'll catch you on the next project.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. Have a great day.
You too.
Yeah, very
Bye.
looking forward and supportive of, you know, what you got going on. It's very inspirational. So, yeah.
Thank you. I
Great work.
appreciate it, guys. You too. All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.